Go ahead and get started, and thank you for joining the San Carlos breakout room. Looks like we have a few folks with us tonight, and more may be joining, but thank you for taking the time out of your evening to join us here. First of all, I would just like to sort of start off by introducing the San Carlos team. So once again, I'm Lisa Porras, Planning Manager for the City of San Carlos, and also joining me from the city is Judy Hawk, Management Analyst.
Hi, everyone.
And Sarah Cadona, our Assistant Planner.
Hi, nice to meet you.
And then we have Josh Abrams from Baird and Driscoll. He's one of the key staff persons that's organizing the 21 Elements joint effort between the county and all the cities in San Mateo County. So we're the team that are going to be with you this evening and facilitating this particular session. And before we get started, I just wanted to start off by giving a little bit of background about San Carlos. Some of you may have already participated in some of the San Carlos's workshops. What happened with the city of San Carlos is we got off to a little bit of an early start. We hired our consultants last year in 2020, and by the fall in November, we had our first workshop. And then just in January, we had our second workshop. So we're working with a set of consultants to help us, the city, update our housing element. And we definitely want to be here tonight with the rest of the cities in San Mateo County. So we're making a presence here, and we'll continue to make a presence here. That way we can ensure that we're capturing as many individuals as that want to know about what's going on with the housing element in San Carlos as possible, and then sort of refer you over to our San Carlos 2040.org website, where you can sign up and receive updates about all of the activities concerning the housing element, including future workshops, any surveys, access materials. We have quite a bit already on our website, which is shown at the bottom of the screen. So if you go there, you can access and some of the recordings from the first workshop and also the second workshop. You can get some information about some of the surveys that we've taken and also some workshop summaries. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about some of the things that we've heard so far. But really, again, like Brandy was saying, we're here tonight to really hear from you and to learn more, and then really encourage you, if you want to follow San Carlos, to get on the San Carlos 2040.org mailing list. So like our first slide indicates, we just kind of want to know who's here. I think this is a great group. It's a pretty intimate group. So if you can go to the chat and give us your name and say something that you love about San Carlos in particular. Like, what is it about San Carlos that's really great? And this is just an icebreaker. So thank you for doing that. We are recording this, and we're also going to be capturing all of your comments off of the chat, and then basically be adding that to the information that we received so far. So, and I'm trying to see if I can see. Sarah, are you able to see the chat? I don't know why I'm not able to see it.
Yes, I am.
I can, oh, okay. Do you want to read some of the comments?
I think we have just two, but yeah, and if you want to go ahead, if someone can read those for me.
Oh, yeah, why don't, we have Brittany says, love our restaurants and especially the walkable streets through these last several months. And David says, I love the walkable and relatively lively downtown. And it looks like someone is in the wrong room. Let me try and reassign you. Well, Genevieve.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. I would agree. I think San Carlos does have a great downtown, and I'm not biased. I really do think so. So let's move on to the next slide. What I'm going to be sharing with you, for those of you that are here and interested in San Carlos, is a little bit about our context. So we can just sort of set the stage, and we'll go from there. So for San Carlos, who lives here? Well, we are a city that is sandwiched between Belmont to the north and Redwood City to the south. And in between Highway 101 and the 280, as you can see on the map to the left, we have a population in 2010 that was identified by the census as 28,406. And what we know right now is that it's growing, has grown to over 30,000. We have over 11,000 households, and our average household size is 2.68. As far as land use distribution in our city, as you can see on our general plan land use map to the left, all in yellow is single family residential. And by far that makes up just a little bit over half of our land use in the entire city. Followed by that, we have a lot of parks and open space, although our general plan does have a metric that calls for a little bit more and identifies where in the city more is desired. And I'm just going to use my mouse here, and I think you can see that. And so where we have a lot of our multifamily and mixed use is pretty much characterized by this triangle here that extends off of San Carlos Avenue and then kind of holds or hugs the downtown. And then El Camino Real, that serves as our multifamily and mixed use spine, if you will. And then everything to the east of that, well, not everything, but mostly to the east of that, you're going to find industrial and some general commercial. And then we do have a pocket of single family residential known as the Greater East San Carlos neighborhood. Of course, we're home to the San Carlos Airport. Here is Highway 101. And again, our land uses basically get lower, the density gets lower as you move west all the way out to Highway 280, where we have a big portion of our open space. So again, the real takeaway here is, what kind of land do we have in current uses right now in our city? And this is the way they're currently laid out. As far as people who live here, majority of the people that live here is in the age group of 45 to 64, with just over 9,000 of the population in that particular cohort. And then after that, we have quite a bit of young people in our community. And then the 65 and up is our lowest percentage. Our median age, that's the age that's kind of right in the middle, is 42.2, just over 42. In terms of rates of home ownership and rental, so who owns homes and who rents, well, by far we're a community where most of the people own the home that they're living in, whether that's a condo or a single family residential. But as we just saw on the slide before, most people are homeowners of single family residential. And then we have a much smaller group, 28% of the people who live in San Carlos are actually renters. And as far as our overall housing stock, so in San Carlos, we have just over 12,000 units in our entire city. And of those units, the majority of them are single family residential, which is not a surprise at this point, given the map we just saw. And then a lesser amount at 28%, 3,400 is the rental stock in our city. Our general plan housing element right now really promotes and calls for a mix of renters, a mix of homeowners, that the housing that is available is a mix of that. But what we're starting to hear more and more is like, we need more of a mix. We need more rental, given that we don't have a large amount of that. So that's something that we can take a look in our general plan in terms of the policies and goals that we set forward, is to really take a look at that and see what we can do to kind of help promote and encourage that particular type of housing in our city. So as Brandy mentioned at the kind of introductory portion of the presentation this evening, our RHNA, or our Regional Housing Needs Allocation, is essentially a housing target that's provided to every city and county in the state of California. And that's a housing target for an 8-year period. And the period that we're currently in right now, which is started in 2015 and goes all through the year 2022. So by the time 2023 starts, we're in a new housing element cycle. So our current cycle and our current target since 2015 has been to provide and make sure that we have zoning in place that can at least, at the minimum, provide 596 units in San Carlos between 2015 and 2022. Now, it's not a construction obligation because, of course, the city itself, we're not developers. We don't go and find land and build, although sometimes we do for affordable housing, 100% affordable housing. There might be land where a city might get involved in, but for the most part, as we all know, housing is being provided by the market, by private developers. But what we need to do is make sure that our zoning does not prohibit or constrain housing production. If a developer wants to come forward, or if someone wants to add an ADU, accessory dwelling unit, to the property, that they can do it. So our target in the current housing cycle is 596. And of those, 195 was the aim for the very low income portion. And then another 107 for low, 111 for moderate. And then above moderate, or what I call market rate, is 183. So what have we done? What have we done since 2015? Well, we issued permits to build 22 very low income, 14 low, 13 moderate, and 526 above moderate. So we've gone above and beyond what our aim was for the above market rate category, and we're falling short in the low income categories. So this is one of the things that we know and we're taking a look at, and we need to really think, what can we do to really boost the overall numbers in the affordable housing categories so that San Carlos can be more inclusive and make it affordable for folks to live in our community. As you can see here, overall, if we're looking at our RENA need, even though we produced 575 new units as an overall number, we're still short by we're short by 364, which is our RENA target. So this is kind of like our report card and where we stand now. Of course, right now we're in 2021 and we still have the rest of this year, to get units permitted, and then we have all of 2022. But if we look at these numbers, it's very unlikely that we're going to meet all of that in the next 1.5 years. So that's just something for us to consider as we move forward and look at our updated housing element. So in terms of our accomplishments, as the last slide showed, 575 new units were issued permits for construction. Just last year alone, we saw a really nice uptick in the amount of accessory dwelling units, ADUs or granny flats, that were approved in San Carlos. And 39 is a pretty good number for San Carlos, given that historically we have permitted, sometimes only 4 units in a given year, sometimes 7, sometimes 12. So last year we kind of saw the most number of ADUs that are being submitted by homeowners who want to build that additional unit, who want to build that additional unit on their property. So that's good news, because that also provides, additional units for people to live in. Some of the key projects in terms of, what we have been able to do in terms of low affordable housing is permit a almost 100% 23 unit very low income project at 817 Walnut. And what was permitted was actually 24, but the 1 unit was set aside for the manager to live on site. So that's a regular market rate unit. But the other units, the other 23 units, are set aside for very low. And so this was a partnership that the city entered into with an affordable housing provider in order to get this type of project built in our city. And that's this rendering here, where you can see my mouse, is a depiction of that project that's currently under construction. We also permitted 35 condos at 626 Walnut, where there are a few affordable housing, affordable units incorporated with that project. The same with 560 El Camino Real, and then 1240 El Camino Real. And how we're getting those low-income units has to do with what's called a below market rate housing ordinance that requires a certain percentage of the units. Once you build a housing project that has 7 or more, 15% of the units have to be set aside as affordable. So the methodology, the formula is something that the city is currently looking at, again, to see if we can boost the numbers for affordable housing. So this year, we're also going to be working on one of the programs of the housing element, which is the below market rate housing ordinance, which I actually mentioned here. So this next slide just talks about, what are some of the policies that we've taken, policy actions that we've taken since 2015 to really, boost and encourage housing. Well, one thing that the city did is that in 2016, at the end of 2016, the San Carlos City Council adopted what is called a commercial linkage fee. And this is a fee that basically is assigned to certain commercial developments depending upon the type and the square footage, and there's a whole methodology and calculation assigned to this as well. But basically, this is a fee that's assigned to those types of projects. And once those fees are collected from those projects, they go into an affordable housing fund that can then be used to help build affordable housing, such as the project that I showed on the previous slide at 817 Walnut. This became effective as of March 2017. So as we are seeing more applications for commercial development, those developments will be needing to pay this commercial linkage fee, which then the city can use to help promote and get more affordable housing units in our city. From a citywide, so that's citywide for commercial development. And then also citywide was an amendment to our existing accessory dwelling unit ordinance. I'm sure this is something that has come across, a lot of our desks in some way, or at least our awareness, because of the new laws. There's been sort of like a handful of new laws kind of being passed by the state, maybe since 2015, 2016, 2017, that are making it a lot easier to build accessory dwelling units, basically giving more flexibility to the side and rear yard setbacks, making sure that lot coverage maximums do not constrain accessory dwelling units. So with these added provisions that all cities in California and the county have to abide by, we're seeing more development with accessory dwelling units. So we updated our ordinance effective last November to make sure that it's consistent with the state's requirements. And we are seeing more accessory dwelling units. And then lastly, as I just mentioned, we are going to be working on updating our below market rate or inclusionary housing ordinance this year as well. So where are we headed? Where are we going, and what are some of the requirements that we have to fulfill? Well, as Brandy mentioned, with all of the increase in commercial development and jobs being added to the region, the Bay Area is a region of 9 counties, 101 cities. I think I remember that correctly. But, the whole Bay Area, we don't live where there's walls. People live in one city, work in another city, and all cities are responsible for building and having, not building, but making sure our regulations promote housing. So because housing is really expensive, and for a lot of other reasons that we're probably familiar with, we're starting to see much larger RHNA numbers. So as I mentioned in a couple of slides back, our total RHNA number for the current housing cycle, which ends at the end of 2022, is 596 units. Well, looking ahead, we're going from 596 units to over 2,700 units. So this is like a 4.5 times increase. So what does this look like? Well, with the very low and low and moderate, which is the affordable housing component, those numbers have continued to rise. And what we're really seeing, if we're kind of looking at the breakdown, is a pretty high number in the very low income category, because that's the area with the highest need. So we went from 195 to 739 units. So that's an increase of 544 very low income units from our last RHNA allocation. And so this chart is really kind of breaking this down. As you can see, the numbers here, quite a big uptick. So as we move forward and we look at the land that we have, remembering the map that we just saw, our role is with the community, with your input, is to figure out where to put this additional housing. So we can look at that zoning where housing is currently allowed and ask ourselves, well, where do we want to have this change occur? We can certainly move from a maximum of 50 feet high in height and 4 stories, which is typically the limit you'll find in our multifamily and mixed use areas in the downtown and along El Camino Real. This is where our highest density is currently placed. Whether that's something that we want to change. Are we willing to go up another, couple stories, or are we not? Are we not willing to do that? And if we're not willing to do that, then where would we put this housing? So while the state sets the number, it's the local jurisdiction. It's up to us to determine where we want that to go. So this is a big reason why we need your input. This is a big reason why all the cities are reaching out to community members to have this conversation, to figure it out together, because the staff is not going to figure it out by ourselves. Our electeds don't want staff to figure it out by ourselves. This is a community-wide effort. And the more that the community can understand, what the housing challenges are and be part of the decision in terms of where this housing should go, then the idea is that over the years, people understand and it makes sense. Okay, this is why this development is happening over here. It's because this is what we chose. And so we understand why it's happening. So these are pretty big numbers, but this is not just a huge increase for San Carlos. It's an increase for all of the cities, not just in San Mateo County, but all throughout, the Bay Area region. So as I mentioned before, we've had a couple of workshops already, and we've had, this conversation. We presented our arena. We started to talk about, what criteria should we think about in terms of locating new housing? Should it be close to transit? Should it be walkable, to everyday needs and services? Can you catch a bus? Can you catch a train? Can you walk to school? Those sorts of things. Also considering environmental factors like, should we put less in the floodplain or the floodway? And what about in areas that are prone to wildfire risks? So we started to have really robust conversations, and we got a lot of feedback. And again, if you're interested, I would encourage you to go visit some of the recordings and listen to what some of your other, neighbors or the San Carlins have said already. And we have some really nice summary reports as well. So this slide is just really kind of showing just a snapshot of some of the things that we heard from the community, that new housing should be close to transit. We should really create a walkable environment. It should be multimodal, where there's many modes of travel recognized that are easy for people to use, and that the design and development be really high quality. It's something that San Carlos prides itself. If it's going to be here, we want it to look nice, fit in, and be attractive in our community. We've also heard concerns about density. Like if we're adding more density, well, what are we thinking about the traffic congestions, and how are we going to handle that? To even, concerns about, climate change and, looking at building codes and what can we do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the way that housing is powered. We also recognize the need for housing for seniors and assisted living as our population ages into the future. We also talked about implications of having so much single family, and what does that mean? And does that perpetuate inequities as the population continues to grow? Impacts to infrastructure, wastewater facilities, needs for open space, and as the community grows, what about schools and making sure that there's adequate needs? We meet our needs with respect to schools and how we coordinate with the school. That we should avoid sprawl, and higher densities should be acceptable, but in certain locations. Concerns about wildfires and added development if that is to go into the hills. Also concerns about, looking at undergrounding utilities and how we should be doing that, making sure that there's a variety of housing options, not just the few types, but lots of types. And that we start to think about, maybe adding some non-residential uses, meaning like small retail or some sort of commercial that can be interspersed within residential zones. So it's easy to access, some basic goods and services. So this is kind of like what we heard so far. And there's a lot more, but in the spirit of time, and because I don't want to be the one talking a lot, I would encourage you again to go to our website. So in terms of SanCarlos2040.org and where we're at, as I mentioned, we started our workshops in the fall of 2020. And as you can see on this slide here, public input is part of the process every step of the way, all the way to the point in which this is going to go before the Planning Commission and City Council for adoption. So where we're at right now is we're continuing to have, workshops and discussions with the community. While we're here tonight as part of 21 Element San Mateo County effort, we also are going to be having our own workshops as part of SanCarlos2040.org. And our next workshop we think is probably going to be sometime in June. And our next workshop is we're going to be really sort of focusing on 3 case studies, kind of like evaluating some sites and showing some possibilities for what can occur on the site, looking at increasing densities, what might we need to change with respect to zoning, perhaps parking, in order to make these kind of projects pencil. Like, what's it going to take to really make this happen? So we're going to be presenting some case studies at our next workshop, not part of this, but again, part of SanCarlos2040.org. And then we're going to be doing, as part of our work, we're also updating our safety elements. So when you go to SanCarlos2040.org, you're also going to hear information and discussion about potential changes to our land use, because the general plan, in terms of all the chapters that it also has a land use and a housing and a safety. So we're going to be updating housing, land use, and safety all together. So as you continue to follow us, you may hear us talk about the safety element as well. We are hoping to start drafting some of the elements and policies, and from all of the input that we received so far, probably starting to work on that this summer. We're going to be starting to reaching out to the state and representatives from the state concerning a wildfire risk with CAL FIRE to start to review some of our policies. And we are also going to be doing an environmental analysis on all of this. So every change that we're making to housing element policies, any change that we're making to zoning, all of this is going to be evaluated under CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality Act. It will be evaluated. All of the impacts associated with these changes will be released to the public, so the public can be informed, so our decision makers can be informed and understand that if we change certain things, what does that mean with respect to CEQA? And then following that, we will be going to the Planning Commission and City Council probably late summer of next year, 2022, with the adoption targeted by the end of 2022 and in time for the state's certification. So I can't remember if Brandy mentioned this, but the state does get involved in the housing elements for all cities in California. This is one element that they really have a focus on, and it actually needs to be certified to make sure that we're consistent with housing element state law, and that we're not unduly, constraining development of housing production. So they actually have a role, and it has to be certified. So we want to make sure we get our housing element certified, and all of that would be done by 2023. So with that, I think I'm going to pause for a moment. And if anybody has any questions so far about any information that I presented or just anything in general, I'm happy to pause here. We do have some questions that are going to sort of bring us into a dialogue with one another that we'll get to in just a minute. But I think I'll pause here and see if we have any questions. I don't know if something came up in the chat or if somebody would like to ask a question.
So we did have a couple of questions in the chat that I can read out, but if anyone has questions right now, we can also do that too. Okay, I guess I'll just read some of the questions in the chat, and then if anyone else has any questions, feel free to ask them. So we got some comments about the lovely things people like about San Carlos. And so the first question is, what is the estimated outcome of housing units built based on these policy actions? And that was referring to the RENA slides.
Yeah, so the expected outcomes of that, but one of the things that we have in the housing element is called quantified objectives. So this is where we quantify, based upon, the new housing programs that the city is committed to amending or working on or introducing or adding as completely new, how many housing units do we think we're going to be able to get to for the particular RENA allocation? So while one of the ways that we do that is clearly through the zoning, we look at our zoning, and the zoning basically tells you how much of what you can build where, right? So once we know where we're going to change our zoning, after discussion and agreement with the community, we come up with a calculation. We also look at programs, like if we amend our BMR ordinance, our below market rate housing ordinance, say it goes from 15% requirement for affordable housing to 20%, and say we lower the threshold for projects, from 7 or above, maybe we say projects 4 and above, what do we think we're going to get as a result of that particular program? So we'll really start to see what that looks like once we start kind of gathering all of the pieces that kind of are working together to kind of show what kind of housing production we're likely able to meet with all of these things in consideration. So that's how I would respond to this right now. But ultimately, what the state is going to be looking at is to make sure that we have sites identified, land, parcels with APNs and addresses. We're identifying them. The housing element actually contains like a big table of every site by assessor parcel number, by address, by zoning, and a calculation of how much we think we're going to get. So we still have to show to the state that we're going to be able to meet that RENA allocation of just over 2,700 units.
And there was a follow-up to that question, and that was, and how much could we multiply that impact by clearing the exclusionary constraints of the enormous yellow single-family zone from the map?
I think that is more of an editorial comment than a sincere question, but I don't think we have a counterfactual reality to know exactly how much would be how much housing would have been produced if we had changed single family zones. Though that is something that we're looking into on a regional level to see basically that question for different cities. So we don't have any answer now, and I don't think we'll ever be able to say for sure, but we'll be able to give some indication of how much housing production is possible.
Thanks, Josh.
Other than that, I just have comments here, so which I keep track of.
Right. Well, maybe we'll move on. I mean, we're a small group, so, I think we'll have plenty of time. Anything else comes up, So we want to hear from you. So I think we're a small group, and I think this kind of goes without saying, but, when we're talking about housing, for anyone who's, new to the conversation or you're a pro, we kind of know that there's no right or wrong answers. This is a conversation, right? We're here tonight to have a conversation. We're here to share the space, to talk with each other, to learn, to hear from you, respect one another, take the time to listen to each other and not interrupt, and make sure everyone has a chance to speak. But I don't think we'll have any problems with that because we are so small. So let's go ahead and look at some of the questions that we wanted to hear from you about tonight. So the first question is, we want to know, well, what's working in San Carlos? What have we done? I mean, maybe we haven't done enough affordable housing, but, there's been quite a bit of new housing in San Carlos. There's the Trestle project, or the Transit Village, all along El Camino Real. I joined the city in 2013. That was a big change. Of course, Wheeler Plaza has developed with 108 condos. That's a big change. But maybe, and there's other smaller mixed use projects that have gone up in San Carlos. There's more ADUs being built. If you live in San Carlos neighborhoods, maybe you're seeing that. But what do you think is working? So that's something that's really helpful for us to know. So we can kind of say, okay, that's good. Let's maintain that. The other thing we want to know is, from your perspective, what are some of our key housing needs? What do we need in San Carlos? And where do you think there's going to be some challenges, and where might you see, some opportunities, what the city, should capitalize on? And then if you have any ideas, for any kind of policies or programs, any suggestions, this is pretty open for how we can meet our housing needs. And then almost last, we want to make sure that we hear from our community. It's really important. And, part of the work that we do as staff and with our consultant teams, this is something we think about and work on a lot. It's like, how are we going to make sure to reach people, in San Carlos, for San Carlos 2040, maybe I can let Sajudi or Sarah speak up because they've been pretty much the masterminds of this and implementing it. But we've thought about, well, what ways can we reach out to our community? There's a lot of social media opportunities. There's Nextdoor, there's Facebook, there's Twitter, there's YouTube, and a lot of cities now have their own accounts or pages. So what about posting? What about, websites? What, maybe advertisements, maybe it's flyers, maybe it's really, working with the schools and the PTAs to get the word out, and other sort of organizations and groups. So this is something that we just don't sort of, skip over. We really think about it because we want everyone to know about this. We want voices to be heard. And this is the community that we serve. So we want to know, what can we do better? How can we meet the needs? Maybe people's, their kids from out of college are moving away. Or maybe there's somebody that wants to come into San Carlos and enjoy living in our community because maybe their office or work is here. So rather than commute, maybe they want to come in. So this is something we think about a lot. So if you have any ideas on how we could reach out, or groups or other ways that make it easy for you to know about what's going on, we want to know about that. And then the last question is really, kind of thinking about the future. And let's pretend it's 2030, 2030, and we've accomplished so much. What would San Carlos look like? What would it feel like, to be able to be in San Carlos at that time and think about all the work that we've done. So because this is such a small group, we don't have to go in order. We can just sort of, just listen to you. And I think, Josh, are we looking to open it up, or we're typing things in, or it can go both ways?
Yeah, it's a small group. Either people can type things in or people can just unmute themselves. We'll see if
Yeah,
we can
yeah,
actually-
I'm open. We're open. So feel free to unmute yourselves, David and Brittany, if whoever would like to talk and speak or share, or if you feel more comfortable putting in the chat. We're going to be taking the chat and adding that to all the input we received so far. So thank you. Who would like to go first? David?
Okay. Brittany put it in the chat around upzoning and looking at R1 zoning and making some adjustments. So how do we start even just looking at the process in San Carlos? I imagine it seems from what you're saying about, we have to look through the housing element and get all the input from the community. But why can't we, I'll just throw it out there, why can't we just have staff be directed to review what it might look like, or some changes that could potentially be considered along the lines of Berkeley and South San Francisco, or San Jose, or other cities are at least exploring these days.
Right. And, I will say that this is something that has the attention of, some members of our community. We have heard this in the workshops in the past. And, some of our, one of our planning commissioners, she mentioned it as well. So we don't know where we're going to land on this. We know that there's definitely some interest, But I could also share that there's definitely interest from people that, live in these areas that don't want any change. Actually, some do and some don't. So we're sort
Well,
of,
that's why you would explore.
yeah,
That's why I'm not coming down on any one place. And of course, there are going to be people against it. And if we review everything in the planning process around the 2030 general plan, of course, there are going to be some people on one side or another, but you're going to have
right.
to make a decision.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think it's going to sort of kind of come out in a complex way. I mean, first of all, we're going to see, well, where can we meet how can we meet our housing needs with, the current zoning we have? And if we can't, what needs to change? And let's say we look at just multifamily in the mixed use along El Camino Real, that mixed use and multifamily corridor. How, in my mind, I think of it like turning a dial. How loud or how much intensity do we need to get in order to show that we can make these 27 units pencil? And if we can't, what else needs to change? And so that's a conversation that so we're starting to hear, but we don't know how well we're going to do until we start calculating everything out. So once we get to that point, it could turn into a more potential robust conversation. Because if the community is not willing to increase densities along El Camino Real or the downtown, then it has to go somewhere. And there's been thoughts about, well, maybe put it on the east side. But then the east side, you've got a lot of industrial, so there's land use compatibility issues. So this is a really, I guess, critical exercise and an important conversation and a real one that, we're going to have to look at. So you bringing it up is not the first, and we'll see where it goes with that. But right now, currently with the state law provisions for accessory dwelling units, you can have a single family home, one ADU, sorry for the planning jargon, and one junior accessory dwelling unit, or JDU, one ADU and JDU, for 3 units on a single family parcel. But some cities have taken it even further, and we're certainly aware of that. People are watching it, and there's even like state laws right now that are looking at potentially making some changes to single family. So we're definitely aware, and we'll see how it goes. But it's a conversation that's only just begun, I think.
I had a sort of different question there maybe. Given that we have those targets, right, for kind of the below and super below market housing, but generally we haven't seen those projects get built over the last cycle. And I think you talked a little bit about this, but how does the city sort of think about like the reasons why those didn't materialize, and can we address those in the next housing cycle? So I've certainly read a lot about like the cost of construction. I'm a homeowner, so I know firsthand to the cost of construction here in the area. I'm guessing it probably has something to do with kind of the height limits, really limiting the cost to build the units and what the developers can do there. I'm sure that's also increased substantially since that last cycle was planned for. But is there anything like that that the city's kind of taking into account as we think about, next time around, how can we do more to actually make sure those units get built by developers or whoever would do that?
Well, I think there's kind of multiple reasons. One of the biggest changes, I think, in terms of the challenges is finding the sites. Certainly with a regular market rate project, say somebody wants to come in and build, 30 rental units. Well, they're going to, I guess up until recently, Josh, maybe you remember the exact date, but there was a certain legal prohibition about requiring rental units to provide below market rate housing units. They had to pay an affordable housing impact fee, but they didn't have to provide the units. Only ownership projects like condos, would be required to provide affordable housing. And then there's this thing called an in lieu. So for the ownership that was required to provide the housing, up until recently, they could say, well, we're going to pay an in lieu fee. In lieu of providing it, we're going to pay a fee. or we're going to provide it. Well, one of the things that the city of San Carlos City Council did recently was to take away the in lieu option. So basically, developers no longer have the option to pay the in lieu fee. We want the units because they're so hard to get. So there were some, I guess maybe control mechanisms that weren't as tight as they could have otherwise been. So that could be a reason. But now, and then of course there was the rental projects where we couldn't require, they just had to pay the fee. But then it takes a lot of money to, accumulate in a fund to be able to get affordable housing constructed. So, I think the below market rate housing ordinance with its newest ability to now require rentals and ownership projects to provide it, and the city council taking away the in lieu option, we're going to see more. But right now, one of the things that we've discovered is that some projects, especially some of the smaller ones, like say, they could build 8 units, but they choose to build 6. Large units. They're building kind of luxury, condos, 6-unit, mixed use projects. And by building 6, they're not hitting the 7-unit threshold, which would then compel them to, putting an affordable unit. So we're thinking about things in San Carlos like requiring minimum density. Like, you have to build at least this. We don't want projects to build under the below market rate, the 7-unit threshold. We need those units. So the council's really aware of this. I think we have a lot more, backing of it. Things are starting to shift, have started to shift in the past couple of years. Although, you could argue, well, that's a little not too late, but we still, can do our best. And we'll look at the below market rate ordinance. We have this new commercial linkage fee. We have a lot of commercial development. So with those very low income categories, a lot of times those are accomplished by acquiring a site. The city will look at programs like, can we acquire, maybe even an existing apartment building and then convert some of those to below market rate, type of units, rental units. So there's different ways that we can do this, whether with existing and converting, or acquiring new sites and then getting more affordable housing built on those sites. So 817 Walnut, that was, I think, originally a 7-unit project. So the city, said, okay, let's scrape it and rebuild and get, a lot more out of it. So if I had our housing manager here, he could probably give you a couple of more, examples of, why that hasn't happened and what needs to change. But there's a lot of things that we can do in zoning, like minimum densities. We can maybe, look at reducing our parking requirement in certain areas where it's really like more walkable, close to transit. Because, you get a small lot, and if you have to throw parking on top of that, it's just so hard. It makes it more expensive, especially to go underground. So all of those factors, plus programs like the BMR ordinance and minimum densities can help. But I think kind of like the needle on the compass is pointing in the right direction. It's definitely improved over the recent years in terms of some of the modifications made, like not to require in lieu, for example. Thank you.
Context, yeah.
Lisa, what your comment about the trellis apartments reminded me of, like Ron rather recently, Ron Collins mentioned that if he had to do it all over again, he would have pushed for higher density at that location. But I worked on the census last summer and really wasn't in a position to call anyone out, but a lot of the apartments at the Trellis complex are owned and managed by companies that provide short-term housing to contractors, to different companies. And I I thought that there was an issue that, okay, it's against the zoning to have anyone live in any of the apartments for less than 30 days, like, for a short-term Airbnb, and that was already sort of baked into the system. But there seems to be an ongoing challenge that if there's a large apartment complex, how to keep some of the apartments from not being turned into short-term rentals. Is there anything that the city can do about that?
Yeah, I think this is something that I think that affects not just San Carlos, but anywhere. And that could be something that we look at, with 21 elements, because if everyone's dealing with this, what are some of the control mechanisms we can put in place. So for San Carlos, we don't explicitly prohibit it. So that could be something we can definitely clean up in our zoning ordinance to make it really clear to anyone. You kind of, it's implicitly implied through our definitions. So we have definitions in our zoning ordinance, and it describes what a unit is, for individuals that X, so it's kind of, if we were to find somewhere in our code that says this is not allowed, we can find it through our definitions by piecing those together and say, okay, here, this is why you can't have it. So technically, you're right, they're not allowed, but we can make it definitely much more clear in our zoning, and that's something that we can take a look at. And I think we would be interested in some sort of program or just look at best practices, like what we can do to ensure that the units that are built are really there to serve, the long-term needs of an individual and not just for use for short-term. It looks like we have 5 minutes for, I saw a little sign, so I guess we can save the chat, Sarah, if you don't mind doing that, and then we'll save it again. So I think we have 5 more minutes. So, but that's my response. I think that's a real issue. And yes, we definitely, when the Trestle apartments came online, we found that out right away, and we got our city attorney involved, and we had to have conversation, with Prometheus, and in order to address that. But, we definitely need to find, some tools where we can, find ways to make sure that doesn't happen and close any gaps or leaks about that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't point to anything specific because I have confidentiality in place, but there were a number of units where they said, oh, I haven't been here for more than a few weeks, or no, I haven't been here since April 1st. And there were several units that are still currently at the Trestle apartment complex used in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's unfortunate, but maybe not surprising, right? Yeah. Okay. Any thoughts about ideas for, in your minds, where should this new housing go? What do you guys think? Where should we put it? What should it look like? I mean, it's probably going to have to be multifamily. We don't have land for more single family. But there's open space, but I don't think that's the direction.
Well, I'm just sorry to dominate, but I live in White Oaks, and everyone complains about sort of McMansions, going up everywhere. Everyone trying to use up every inch of space that they have on their property, going up 2 stories, from front to back, and I find it really hard to believe that anyone who's okay with a McMansion next door wouldn't mind that same footprint for, say, a duplex. You're not allowed to go any higher, same setbacks, etc. It seems like that shouldn't be an issue, but if you approach it with the community like, okay, it's all or nothing, you can put tall apartment buildings next door or anything, but just a duplex is basically just a modification of the ADU and JADU law. Instead of 1/3 or in your backyard, you can basically split your property a little bit more, with a little bit more flexibility, considering your needs versus your children or your grandparents or your caregiver or whoever. Just a little bit more flexibility, just throwing that out there.
I'll just piggyback
Yeah.
for a second too, because I know the room's about to close, but yeah, I'm here in a single family neighborhood too, right by the charter school. And before this, we lived in a duplex in Palo Alto and really loved how walkable it was. We were right by downtown. We have all these amenities. And sort of our biggest regret here is we have to drive to pretty much everything. We're like a little too far from downtown. I don't feel super safe biking. But I feel like if we did have these pockets of increased density, we could have, you know, maybe a little bit more in terms of neighborhood centers of things like a coffee shop or just really small scale stuff even, but to really bring the community together a lot more in different pockets. So I am definitely encouraged for the future vision. I think we can really transform how the community is and be able to just really have a lot of types of people here again. I think it was a diverse place before, at least in terms of, you know, occupations and things people did for work, if not racially. And I'm super excited to see where we go in the future.
Wonderful. Whoops. That was my own. Sorry. That was my own. That was my own alarm. Okay, it looks like before we go, and it looks like they're going to prompt us to maybe go into the larger room. Just real quick, I'm going to move this out of the way here. But just as a reminder, please sign up on our mailing list at sancarlos2040.org. If you need any help, you know, go ahead and email Sarah. Her email's right here on this screen. If you have any further questions, you know, my email is up here. We're looking to have our next work probably early June. We were hoping to have it sooner, but you know, sometimes things take a little bit longer. And we'll continue to make a presence, have a presence here with our cohorts here in 21 Elements. So with that, thank you all very much for being here. And I hope you stay involved, and thanks for sharing the evening, a little bit of your evening with us. Take care. Nice
Thank
to meet
you.
you both.